Welcome to the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Larry Casper. Our topic today is the legislative agenda in Harrisburg. Join our discussion by calling us at 1-877-PA6-5001 or text us at 717-219-4001. We'll also take your questions from PCN's Facebook page submitted earlier today. First, we're joined by Jim Lee, president of Susquehanna Polling and Research. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you so much, Larry. Nice to be here.
The first question in your new poll is about next year's election for president. Set that up for us. What did you find out?
Well, we found that President Biden has a lead. It's a reflection of the popular vote, which he won 4 years ago. He's leading by a 47-40 margin. Remember, this is a nationwide survey of the popular vote. And there's a couple of things going on here, Larry. First, I would say the president leads primarily because he's the incumbent. He's the one getting his message out. But you'll notice in the internals of the survey, there's a lot of concern about the Biden administration. The approval rating for the president's been very low. And despite that, because Trump is such a polarizing figure, you're seeing a lot of the Democrats solidify around the incumbent president, which is why he's leading in the polling.
Jim, do you suppose Donald Trump's recent legal problems have been an influence on how your poll was answered?
Not to a great extent, Larry. The polling shows the president has continued, the former president, has continued to attract a significant share of the Republican vote. He's doing well in most of the primary states that we've surveyed around the nation. He seems to be emboldened by the legal troubles he's in. So he's in a very good position to be the Republican nominee based on the surveys that we've looked at thus far.
Let's consider another question you asked in your poll, Jim. It has to do with how confident voters are in the two major parties in Washington. What were your findings?
Well, we asked it as an agree-disagree question, and only 12%, Larry, of Americans said they have confidence that the two major political parties in Washington, D.C. will do the right thing for America. That's completely disconcerting. It shows that most people believe the system is broken. Right now, many Americans are struggling. They're struggling with high inflation, gas prices, rising crime, problems in their communities, and they don't feel they're getting the solutions they need out of Washington. One poll I looked at shows an overwhelming high percentage of Americans, 8 in 10, believe that Congress is dysfunctional and is not doing the job it was elected to do. So there's an extreme amount of frustration among the American public on this question, and I think it manifests in these numbers.
So tell us, Jim, given your experience as a pollster, when's the last time you saw such lopsided numbers? Again, this is 81% disagreeing with the statement, I have confidence in both major political parties in Washington. 81%, that's a whole lot.
It sure is. And the irony of this is, given the polarized climate we're in right now, Larry, in this nation, where Republicans and Democrats seem locked in, this is one question where you find unanimous support. We have 11% of Republicans, 15% of Democrats, and only 12% of independents agreeing that the country and its leaders are working together in a productive way. So you have general disagreement on this question, and it really speaks to the times.
Let's consider a third and last question, Jim, from your poll, and it has to do with U.S. involvement in world affairs, and that strikes me as especially timely at this moment. Tell about the thinking and the timing of that question.
Sure thing. We thought it would be important to find out how Americans are absorbing information from the Biden administration right now about the proper role we should have in international conflicts vis-a-vis the war in Israel and the war in Ukraine. And what this survey result shows is that Americans don't want us to be isolationists or to withdraw, but instead want us to take a proactive role in these fights to make sure that these wars don't become wars on our shores. I saw one survey result that 53% of Americans believe the U.S. support for Israel in its conflict in the Gaza Strip right now makes the Middle East safer. 53% of Americans believe that our support for Israel makes the Middle East safer. Saw another poll result where close to 8 in 10 Americans are concerned that this conflict in Israel could spiral to include other nations in the Middle East. So Americans are responding very definitively in this survey that they believe U.S. involvement is critical. And when the Biden administration talks about more funding for Ukraine, more funding for the war in Israel, giving those countries the tools they need to fight those battles and to fight terrorists, he's really in sync with the American public.
Jim, we only have about a minute left in this segment, so tell us very briefly the methodology in your poll. Who participated? How many people were polled?
Sure thing, Larry. This is a nationwide survey. What we do is we conduct telephone interviews on a nationwide basis with a random sample of Americans. There were 1,000 Americans surveyed that agreed to be participants in this survey. The margin of error for 1,000 interviews is plus or minus 3.2%, which is a pretty low margin of error, meaning we have an extreme amount of confidence with the survey results.
Jim Lee, president of Susquehanna Polling and Research, thank you.
You're welcome.
The PCN Capitol Preview returns after a short break.
I'm Dave Williams, your host here in Pennsylvania Country Roads. Come join me as we travel throughout the countryside of Pennsylvania, places that you love to see, the people you love to meet, and of course, the many wonderful things that go on in our state. All this and much more every Sunday morning at 7 a.m. on PCN TV.
PCN proudly brings you coverage of the Pennsylvania State Legislature. We bring you the State House and Senate floor proceedings as they happen, unedited and complete. Our mission includes committee meetings, budget hearings, interviews with prominent legislators, and other public policy forums. PCN is your destination for the best in Pennsylvania legislative coverage on cable and PCN Select. PCN is Pennsylvania politics and policy. After a great victory over Union forces in June 1863, Robert E. Lee marches his army to Pennsylvania. The advancing Confederates clash with General Meade's Union Army at Gettysburg, beginning the most famous battle of the Civil War. Explore our nation's past and the Gettysburg battlefield with the Gettysburg Collection. Become a member to stream the library online. Learn more at gettysburgcollection.com.
Focus on Aging Adults, in partnership with AARP, brings you a monthly panel discussion with topics such as prescription drug prices, holiday scams, retirement communities, and more, helping you understand issues important to seniors. Focus on Aging Adults, monthly on PCN. Visit PCNTV.com for the latest episodes and to see the upcoming schedule. PCN, proud to bring Pennsylvania to you.
Welcome back to the PCN Capitol Preview. Our guests are Kevin Harley, Managing Director at Quantum Communications, and Brit Crampsie, President of Brit Crampsie Communications. Welcome to our program. The latest mass shooting in our country happened in Maine. How are Pennsylvania lawmakers responding to this event?
They're responding in the same way that they responded after Sandy Hook, after Parkland, after Las Vegas, after the Tree of Life, after, for goodness sakes, the Columbine shooting. They're not doing anything. And it's incredibly unfortunate. Other states have acted. There are simple, common sense, widely supported measures that we can use to curb gun violence. Things as simple as emergency risk protection orders, which would remove firearms temporarily from people who have explicitly threatened violence against themselves or somebody else. And they can't even get the political will in the Republican Party to pass something like that.
Kevin, what do you think?
Well, I think that any new gun control measures in Pennsylvania will go nowhere as long as you have the Republicans in the Senate who will block them, and I think they should, because I think these mass shootings aren't an issue of gun control, which is what the Democrats always run to. It's an issue of mental health. We have more gun owned in Pennsylvania, more guns in Pennsylvania than we do people in Pennsylvania. We don't have mass shootings in Pennsylvania every day. Mass shootings are a completely different issue, and it's a mental health issue almost always, and it needs to be addressed through our mental health issues. But just saying that this is an excuse now to go and grab guns is ridiculous. I mean, you had a couple years ago up in Milwaukee where you had the crazed person take their car into a parade, and but the Democrats were not saying we have to eliminate all automobiles. So you've got to deal with the direct issue of mental health of these individuals. And you can see even in Maine, there were all kinds of, with this individual, there were breakdowns in the mental health, his treatment. So let's address that and not use this as an excuse to take law-abiding citizens' Second Amendment rights away.
I don't think this is an either-or conversation. There are certainly gaps in access to mental health care, particularly in the rural parts of this state, but that alone is not going to solve this problem. I mean, we've seen common sense gun reform measures used to great success. There was a federal assault weapon ban for a number of years, and mass shootings plummeted. And it's not really fair to compare this to vehicular homicide. When you own a vehicle, you have to have a license where you're tested on your capacity to use it, and you have to carry insurance. You don't have to do either of those things to carry a firearm. And you run over a couple of people, it's horrible, it's a tragedy, but you're not able to mow down dozens of people in a minute.
Kevin, what do you think about what Brit just said, that we did have an assault weapon ban for a while? She says the mass shootings went down.
Go back. I mean, look when we had an assault weapons ban and Congress repealed it because it was not effective. It was not effective. It's not the guns. It's the people behind the guns that are using them. I mean, we have a Second Amendment right in this country. And we also have, in our Pennsylvania Constitution, basically it's very clear that says the citizens' rights to own a firearm will not be impugned. That is that was written in our Constitution for a reason. There's an issue of mass shootings that has to be dealt with. Senator Regan has a really good legislation that would increase funding for school resource officers. So let's deal with it that way, but let's not infringe on our constitutional right.
That means having armed guards in our schools?
Correct.
The Constitution talks about a well-regulated militia. It doesn't talk about your right to own an unlimited number of assault weapons. This is very, very different. I think we're extrapolating a lot from well-regulated militia.
Well, let's talk about one more aspect of gun control and the history of gun control in Pennsylvania, at least as far as legislators are concerned. And Brit, you touched on it a minute ago, the so-called red flag laws, also known as extreme risk protection orders that take guns away from people who are in crisis, might be a danger to themselves or someone else. So that did go into the House at some point, and I think it was voted on in the House, and maybe that was the end of it. So I'm just trying to find out a recent history on what's happened in this respect in the last year or two.
It passed the House of Representatives, democratically controlled, a number of months ago. It hasn't gone anywhere in the Senate. It did move in the General Assembly a couple of years ago. It hasn't quite made it across the finish line. And we've been talking about mass shootings, and I think that is one of the big reasons to pass a law like this. But the presence of a firearm in the home of someone who is suicidal drastically increases their risk that they will complete that suicide. If you remove the weapon from someone who has threatened violence against themselves, you drastically reduce their risk of suicide. This is a bill that addresses mass shootings, small shootings, and suicide, particularly among the veteran community.
Let's talk about the death penalty here in Pennsylvania. The House Judiciary Committee plans to vote on a death penalty bill. But first of all, let's consider overall the political environment for the death penalty in Pennsylvania. Who wants to start? Kevin.
Well, I think, if you look at the last time anybody was executed in Pennsylvania was Gary Heidnik. I believe it was back in 1999. He was a serial rapist. It was a terrible situation in Philadelphia. It was national news. And he did not fight his death. and that's one of the reasons he was executed. In Pennsylvania, the reason, for the most part, that we have not had, unlike Texas or Florida or some of these other states, is because of the federal judiciary in Pennsylvania. It's the federal judges that have been blocking, because it goes to a federal judge. Even though it's a state court, the appeal process eventually goes to the federal court, and federal judges have been stopping them. And then, of course, you had Governor Wolf that basically had a death penalty moratorium, and so nothing happened there.
That lasted for 8 years then.
Right, but we haven't had anybody executed since 1999. Prosecutors, if you talk to them generally across Pennsylvania, they like to have the death penalty on the table, on the books, because it helps them in terms of prosecuting cases, particularly if they can use that as leverage in saying, okay, you're going to get the death penalty or you can get life in prison. Sometimes you can get a plea agreement with that.
So Kevin said that Governor Tom Wolf had a moratorium on the death penalty. So let's bring the discussion up to date and consider his successor here, Josh Shapiro.
Sure. So after a death warrant goes through the legal channels, the governor of Pennsylvania has to sign off on it. And Governor Shapiro has said that he's not going to. So for all intents and purposes, we don't have the death penalty in Pennsylvania right now because we can't actually enact it. You know, a lot of states have done away with it. Nearly every other industrialized nation has gone away from it. And I'm personally uncomfortable with the idea of using state-sponsored murder as a bargaining chip in negotiation. I mean, we are the only industrialized nation that still kills people, you know, as part of our criminal justice system. I find that a little upsetting.
We do have a law, however, and this was actually passed back when Governor Casey was governor, that if the governor refuses to sign the death warrant, which we've had now with Governor Wolf and also with Governor Shapiro, that the Secretary of Corrections, it's a ministerial duty. He has or she has to sign it. So the death warrant still gets signed.
Let's consider the latest budget here in Pennsylvania. And we know that money is flowing, but it's not complete at this point. So consider just how much oxygen is the budget sucking up in our legislative chambers and possibly distracting lawmakers from doing other important business.
Well, I think, you know, it kind of shows a little bit of the dysfunction of the legislature. We have obviously divided government in Pennsylvania, and we also have, I think you have to realize this from when you look at it from 30,000 feet, is that, you know, we had a new speaker, two speakers already, right, as well as a new majority leader, new Senator Pro Tem, new majority leader, and if you look at the time in service, you know, the Speaker of the House has only been a member for 3 or 4 years. Same with the majority leader in the Senate.
You're talking about Joanna McClinton.
Joanna McClinton, right? And so you have a lot of new leadership. You have 3 out of 4 new appropriations chairmen. So that, I think, is. Yeah, and obviously a new governor who's trying to put an administration together.
It sounds like all these things combined might slow things down. Is that what you're saying?
Right, and it just takes, you know, it takes a while for people to get into a flow. You know, this is all new. The Democrats haven't been in control since 2010, so this is all new to them. There's not many members in the Democratic caucus that were even there before 2010. You have all new chairmen, you know, throughout the entire Democratic caucus. So. There's kind of a learning curve that goes with that, but when you go look at this last budget, you know, you had the deal that on the school choice that you know, Shapiro reneged on, and I think
that would be the school voucher program.
Yes, and I don't think, you know, there's still a lot of raw emotion and feelings about that within the Senate because so that is lingering, and I think you know, I think it showed a huge weakness on Governor Shapiro that he made a promise and then couldn't get the House to deliver on it.
Brit, what did you think of that? The school voucher program, it kind of flared up into a fire for a few minutes and then it disappeared. School vouchers have to do with sending state money to religious schools and private schools. Help pay the tuition.
Correct. So that became part of the budget negotiation later in the process. Governor Shapiro has talked about
that was in the summer, wasn't it?
Correct, yes. So Shapiro has talked about wanting this as he ran for governor. There's some support amongst Democrats. It's mostly supported by Republicans, but it's not supported by quite enough to get it through the House of Representatives right now. So that ultimately fell apart in the late parts of June, and it has since fallen to the wayside. So in putting together a budget, it's a mechanism of pressure. You know, everyone knows the budget deadline is the end of June. And as you get later and later in June, this balloon of pressure inflates and inflates and inflates. So when they were able to pass the general appropriations budget, 80% of the work is done. The air goes out of that balloon. They're not hearing from their constituents as much. They're not hearing from press and media as much about how their work is unfinished. So this 20% that's left over has been able to hang out for a little bit longer than we're used to seeing. And, you know, to your original question to Kevin about other things being part of it, I think that's absolutely happening. You know, Kevin talked, you know, very rightly about the hurt feelings between the chambers, and not only do we have divided government, we have a divided legislature, which we haven't seen. So Republican Senate, Democratic House, Democratic governor, all sort of figuring out how this is going to work together. And every other piece of legislation that could go through these chambers is becoming, I believe, part of the negotiation for this final budget piece.
So it sounds like you agree that there could be hard feelings in these chambers in the wake of this school voucher thing. I hadn't looked at it that way before.
Certainly, you know, I think.
And that has influence on what does and what does not get done in the future.
Absolutely. So there are popular programs that are left undone right now, Democratic-supported ones, things like whole home repairs, which was a project of Democratic Senator Nikhil
What does that
Sawant.
mean, whole home repairs?
Whole home repairs allows working-class families to get state loans and grants to make improvements to homes that they own. So these are things like making sure your roof is not leaking, making sure your home is insulated, making sure you have windows
Important
that aren't
stuff.
Exactly, keeping your home safe, dry, and warm. And it's a program that previously didn't exist for this economic strata that it targets right now. And also, you know, things like mental health funding are caught up in here. But with this voucher piece hanging out and every other piece of legislation that is stuck in the backlog, I think it's a negotiation about everything all at once, not just vouchers.
What about the state-related universities? We know that the funding was, last I checked, it was stalled there. Is that still the case? Give me an update if you can.
So this is just, this is kind of fascinating what's happened is, so the Senate actually passed it and sent it over to the House, but the House, and what's unique about this, it's called the non-preferreds. I'm not sure the history of that term, but you need 2/3 vote, not a 50%, not a simple majority.
And that makes it a non-preferred.
Yes.
Got it.
So, and the four state relateds are always a part of that, and Penn State usually is kind of the leader of that because you've had so many members that are Penn State grads, plus you have branch campuses of Penn State in nearly every corner of Pennsylvania. So, but one of the criticisms that the House Republicans and Republicans in general have been making about the non-preferreds or funding to Penn State is that they continue to fund Penn State and the state-related universities at a very high level, and they continue to raise tuition. And that's one part of it. The other part of it is that because they're state-related and not state-owned universities like the Bloomsburg and Millersvilles and Shippensburgs, that they're not covered by the same right-to-know laws or transparency that the state-owned schools are. And so the idea is we're giving you millions and millions and millions of dollars every year, but when we ask for things like professor salaries or spending, you don't give it to us. So that's a real issue. So this is kind of a complicated story this year. So they could not get to 2/3 vote in the House. They've tried it numerous times. So what the House Democrats did is they essentially just said, we can't win by the rules that have been set up, so we're going to change the rules, and say we only need a 50%, a simple majority, and we're going to turn this into
2/3.
We're going to turn this into a grant. So that passed a week or two ago. That's over in the Senate now. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens with that in the Senate, whether the Senate's going to say, listen, this isn't how you govern, or whether they're going to say there'll be pressure from the state relateds for the Senate to say, hey, we need the money. So this is a very, for somebody that watches this or works in this arena, this is very fascinating what's been happening with the state relateds.
Anyway, it sounds like the ball is in the court of the Senate chamber.
It is, or the calculus can change in the House. Getting to 2/3 when the majority in the House is only Democratic by 1 vote, and sometimes by no votes, given all of the retirements, resignations, and things that have led to so many special elections. Getting to 2/3 is difficult, but I don't think impossible. There have been bumps in the road for non-preferred funding in the past. Pitt has traditionally had a little bit of trouble. They do some fetal and stem cell research that has made them unpopular with the Freedom Caucus, and that's been difficult to get across the finish line before. But to see Penn State, which I believe is the alma mater of 1/3 of the General Assembly, not receive its funding is unique this year.
Viewers, we'd like you to call 1-877-PA6-5001, contact our show, and talk about the legislative agenda in Harrisburg at this moment. Or here's the text option, a different phone number, 717-219-4001. We'll be taking your calls and texts for about the next 25 minutes or so. Let's consider another topic out there that's being debated, and it's of a timely nature. It seems to me like they're on deadline to take care of moving the primary and whether they're going to do it or not. So lawmakers are debating moving the primary on the election calendar, and briefly, why they inclined to do this in the first place, Kevin.
Well, I actually agree with it. I think it's a great idea if we could get it done.
And what does it accomplish if you move it?
Here's what I think. So it's only in a presidential cycle.
And it's just for 2024 is my understanding.
Right. And the reason for that is that Pennsylvania's primary has been so late in the presidential cycle that for all intents and purposes, it's been done, but the nominees are pretty much decided by the time the Pennsylvania primary rolls around. I think the last time we really had a real contested primary was in 2008 with Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, when it still mattered. Certainly in 2016, you still had you had Kasich and Ted Cruz and Trump, but it was Trump was just kind of plowing through all the primaries at that point, so it wasn't as contested. So what this does, if you move the primary, you really make Pennsylvania
currently on April 23rd, by the way.
Right. You make Pennsylvania all the presidential campaigns. Even by then, it still might only be 2 candidates, but still, the idea is you put Pennsylvania in play. You have all the campaigns coming to Pennsylvania. The presidential candidates, campaigning vigorously in Pennsylvania, spending their campaign dollars in Pennsylvania. Certainly, the television stations and newspapers and radio stations would benefit from it. So, and I just think it's a good idea. It's just kind of when you look at how difficult it is to get anything done in the General Assembly, let alone moving a primary, because what you have to remember, Larry, is this affects 203 members, because their primaries get moved, and 25 senators. So it affects them as well. So because you're moving up the time they have to get their petitions circulated, whether that's over Christmas, the holidays, and it's just there's a lot of moving parts to this. But generally, I think it's a great idea. I think it's something we should do, and they've been working on it. They just can't seem to pick the right date or figure it out.
Now, at the same time, this is not occurring in a vacuum. In other words, there are other states I would expect would have similar aspirations, and they want to have more say in the nominee for president too.
Sure, other states have moved theirs up, and which moves Pennsylvania back even further. But another motivating factor for moving our election this year is Rosh Hashanah. It's a high holy day on the Jewish calendar, and it is on the day of our election right now. So for our Jewish citizens to participate, it would be very helpful to move it. There has been some discussion of moving it back, some discussion of moving it forward. But as we consider moving it back into something like March, our county elections offices are getting pretty concerned. There's a lot of machination that goes on behind the scenes to pull off an election. They have all of the written materials, all of the staffing, all of the facilities that they need to use to facilitate an election. And if we move it into March, that puts our petition period on New Year's Day, perhaps as early as that. And these counties don't have a ton of time to get everything in place there. So they wanted to know weeks and weeks ago that we were moving the election, and they're rightfully nervous now. So I'm not sure whether we're going to see it move at all. I know this week Representative Bradford said that he was open to a May date, which defeats the purpose that Kevin was talking about, but does accomplish.
That makes it worse, doesn't it?
It does, actually, yes.
It seems to me that would defeat the purpose.
It's probably better for the legislators to have it later, but I get it defeats the purpose of moving it up so Pennsylvania's in play in a presidential primary.
Uh-huh. So currently, again, the primary is scheduled for April 23rd, and there's some discussion as to when it could be moved before that date. In other words, it seems the discussion is a week, even 2 weeks before that date, and it seems to vacillate, kind of go back and forth.
It does, and much like the fiscal code, it hasn't been finished yet. So some discussion, some ping-ponging bills back and forth, and no signature yet.
All right, I'm going to give you a break, Kevin and Brit, so we can take a look at PCN's programming schedule. On the Issues has 2 more candidates for you to meet tomorrow. They're both running for PA Superior Court. First, at 6 p.m., Republican Maria Batista explains her campaign. Then, on the Democrat side of the ticket, Tamika Lane tells us why she wants your vote at 6:30 p.m. Then we shift our focus to the race for mayor in Philadelphia. Democrat Sherelle Parker and Republican David O will have a debate hosted by KYW News Radio. That's on Thursday morning at 11 o'clock. The public affairs coverage you watch on PCN TV is now online, free of charge. You can view this programming at PCNTV.com or on our streaming service at PCN Select. PCN is a 501c3 nonprofit television network that receives no funding from the government. Donations from viewers like you help us deliver programming created especially for Pennsylvanians. To make a donation, visit PCNTV.com. Now, let me remind everybody watching our program, you can give us a call. We'll be taking your calls for about the next 20 minutes or so. 1-877-PA6-5001 is the number to call. And if you want to text, we have an option for that. The number is 717-219-4001. Okay, we were just talking about the possibility of moving Pennsylvania's primary. Now, here's something that isn't really so politically oriented, and this has to do with things they're calling hydrogen hubs. And what that means is that there's federal funding on the way for manufacturing hydrogen gas in Pennsylvania. So I want to start with, how big is the market for hydrogen anyway?
Well, right now, it's not that big.
Okay.
But the thought is that in the future...
Yes. What does the future hold, Kevin? What are we going to use this gas for?
It would replace, coal, it would be a fuel that you could use for all types of different, and it's obviously...
I heard vehicles. I think some buses are already running on hydrogen.
I don't know about that, Larry, but potentially they could. So it is considered to be kind of it's a clean fuel, so although it can be, there's still some natural gas that I think that would be included. But so the federal government or the Biden administration has said they've put money in for these hydrogen hubs. So it's very competitive. It's, if you think maybe on a smaller scale of the cracker plant in Beaver County that created, it was the largest construction project in the United States. So there'll be a lot of jobs involved in building it, maybe not as maybe a couple hundred people to maintain it once it's up and running. But it's the money's there, it's competitive, and Pennsylvania has been successful. I think the Southeast certainly makes sense, and the Southwest certainly makes sense because it's an energy hub already, the Southwestern.
Yeah, Brit, try to expand on that. Where would these manufacturing sites be located?
Sure. So one is going to be outside of Pittsburgh, one is going to be outside of Philadelphia, and Pennsylvania was the only state to receive funding for 2 of these hubs. So the job creation and economic impact we're going to see is going to be enormous. So we're going to have hundreds, maybe thousands of people employed in the creation of these, which boost the economy of those regions and the state. And then, like Kevin said, hundreds to maintain the plants as they continue into the future. So I think that this will be part of Pennsylvania's cleaner energy future as we move away from things like cracker plants and coal and into a more sustainable options moving forward. And it's great that we have partnership from the federal government to do it.
Now that we've mentioned cracker plants on 2 occasions, you better refresh me on what a cracker plant is.
Kevin knows more on this one than I do.
Sure. So the cracker plant, which is owned by Shell out in Beaver County, what
do they make?
So they take natural gas and break it down into other components that are used for plastics, everything, everything just about your clothes, everything you can think of that natural gas is used in, all the other components. And that's what that factory does. So it takes, we think of natural gas as maybe just heating our homes or, fueling big factories, but natural gas is used in just about every aspect of our life. And that's what that factory does. What's so unique about that is most of the cracker plants currently are down on the Gulf Coast. And so when we got the cracker plant in Pennsylvania, it was one of the first in East North America, actually. So there's not even any in Canada at the moment. So it was a huge win for Pennsylvania to get that. And they're talking about building a cracker plant in Ohio now too. So it's a huge job creator, and because Pennsylvania is basically the Saudi Arabia of natural gas. So it made sense for them to put the cracker plant closer to the feedstock of natural gas.
Now, naturally, as the discussion continues on these so-called hydrogen hubs, places where they manufacture hydrogen, people think about employment and how many jobs could be created by this industry. And a figure I saw was 20,000. That sounds like a lot of jobs. Have you seen any similar figures?
No, I mean, that sounds phenomenal. These are enormous,
That would be between two plants, I suppose, that you brought up, right?
Sure. So there's all of the stages of site development, making sure the brownfield or greenfield area that they're using is suitable for a project like this. And then every level of trades to build even the most simple factory requires hundreds of people. And this is, highly technical, highly skilled jobs. These are family-sustaining jobs as well. So I think that's great to see. And 2 in Pennsylvania, again, is just remarkable.
Now, before everybody celebrates the growth of jobs here in Pennsylvania, the environmentalists have something to say about this. They say the PA government is throwing taxpayer money at a false solution to the climate crisis. In other words, this industry will just make our air and water worse.
I don't think ultimately that's going to happen. I think hydrogen is certainly a cleaner form than what we've been using before, but Pennsylvania is an all-of-the-above energy strategy state. We have a really robust profile of energy sources, and as we continue to develop others like wind and solar and maybe subsidizing nuclear in a way that makes that viable again, I think that hydrogen has a natural place here, and that's certainly worthy of federal investment.
Let's consider a similar subject. At least this addresses the environment. And what I'm talking about is something referred to as the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. It has all kinds of abbreviated names. It's called RGGI. It's called RGGI. It's about Governor Wolf got this started when he wanted power plants in Pennsylvania to pay for the greenhouse gas emissions. And right now that's tied up in court, and but that's beside the point. Let's talk about the polarization that might be occurring within our legislature on this subject.
Well, just to give you, it's essentially a tax on energy. Okay, that's what it is. And the real rub here is that the Pennsylvania legislature, the governor acted unilaterally on his own, and the legislature said you cannot enter into a state compact without legislative approval. So, and that's part of what is in Commonwealth Court right now. And Governor Shapiro has kind of been all over the map on this. He's got a foot, in the environmentalist camp, trying to make the RGGI advocates happy. But you have to remember that we were just talking about the building trades who are opposed to RGGI, and so he's trying to make them happy. So he's kind of talking. He's been talking out of both sides of his mouth on this issue. I'm hopeful that the Commonwealth Court will come back and say that Governor Wolf was wrong, that the legislature needs to approve it. And frankly, I think Governor Shapiro is probably hoping that's the case too, because that way it gets him out of it politically. He can tell the environmentalists, well, I tried, but it's the court said that the legislature has to approve it.
So, Brit, what do you think about what Kevin said? It sounds like he's saying that Governor Shapiro kind of has a finger in different pies here as far as this RGGI program is concerned.
Sure. He's a little bit stuck, honestly. The previous governor entered the compact, and then by the time he took office, it was already being debated in Commonwealth Court.
Right.
So he's going to have to live with the decision of Commonwealth Court here and then go to likely go to the legislature and advocate for enabling legislation for this to happen. But if they go that route, there's the opportunity to do things that make the package a little bit more appealing for labor unions. Things like job training to transition them out of older forms of energy jobs into working at a renewable energy plant. So if the legislature does that, there's opportunities to make more people happy here. But Shapiro is unfortunately in a little bit of a wait and see, in a position I don't think he wanted to be in, tied to this without really any control to change it and waiting on a legal opinion.
Well, I like the idea that you acknowledge the idea of making this program more appealing to more people. So let me ask a real basic question. Really, it doesn't have anything to do with politics at all. So would joining the GGI necessarily reduce the greenhouse gas emissions? It seems that there's a difference of opinion on that. Even if those emissions are limited.
Sure. I think the opposition will say that Pennsylvania is on track to meet those standards anyway, and we can do it without hastening the closure of coal, gas, oil.
So the market's taking care of it anyway.
Right. Much the argument that Republicans make on a lot of items. But other states are using this to motivate that change a little bit faster.
Right. And it's the reason that our emissions have come down so dramatically is because of the expansion of natural gas. There's no question about it. We've closed more coal plants. They've converted over to natural gas. Natural gas is so much more cleaner. And this is just, Reggie's a solution in search of a problem. We don't need it. We don't need to enter a compact. I think it's a bad idea. It's bad public policy, and I hope that the court agrees with the Pennsylvania legislature.
So while it's tied up in court, it's kind of a moot question.
Yes.
Pennsylvania has preceded its entry into Reggie. However, we haven't been required to meet those standards.
Here's another issue that's been bouncing around Harrisburg, and it's minimum wage. And so that seems to flare up sporadically. And House Speaker, she was on our show just yesterday, Joanna McClinton, had predicted action on raising the minimum wage. So where does that debate stand right now? Start with you, Brit.
Pennsylvania's minimum wage remains $7.25 an hour, which puts you below the poverty level for a family of four. We are the only state in the Northeast that has such a low wage, and it is still the federal minimum. We have not raised it since, I believe it's 2005 now, despite the increase in price everywhere else. It remains stalled in the Republican-controlled Senate.
So what are the numbers that are being circulated as far as raising it from $7.25? I've heard a whole variety of numbers.
I think the popular proposals now range from about $9.25 up to $15. So with an increase, there's a lot of support behind something called the COLA, a cost of living adjustment, so that we can do this once and then it raises annually, much like the legislature's salary does, so that we don't need to debate this all the time. That the purpose of the minimum wage was to provide a family-sustaining wage for somebody working 40 hours a week. To provide for their family. If we have to go in and adjust it and it takes 17 years every time, we're condemning full-time workers to poverty. So that's deeply problematic. So regardless of what the number is, it should also include things like increasing the tipped minimum wage, which is now, I believe, significantly lower than $7.25, and making sure that we don't end up in this position again.
Kevin, what do you think?
What you have with the minimum wage, it hasn't been raised in such a long time, so the market has just taking care of itself. You can go, starting job at Sheetz is $19 an hour. Walmart is, I think, $18 an hour. So the free market has taken care of it. They don't need to be told. That's what the market is demanding.
So few people are making $7.25 anyway.
Exactly. So I don't know that there's hardly anybody that pays $7.25 because we have a labor shortage. So workers can demand a higher wage. That's just the reality of it. So this is really kind of defaulted into nothing more than a Democratic talking point, and which has no real basis in economic reality.
Yeah, Kevin might be right that few people are making $7.25 an hour, but no one should be making $7.25 an hour. It's absolutely unlivable. Compared to other states, it's not competitive to work here anymore. And we talk about the market controlling this, but the market is capricious. It could change on a dime. We could not be in a labor shortage. And then as there are more people unemployed, employers are going to lower those starting rates. If we don't set a livable minimum for them, there's no motivation for them to keep it at a family-sustaining rate if the market doesn't require them to.
So if you put your finger in the air to see which way the legislative wind is blowing, is there any willingness out there to deal with this anytime soon?
The only way I think it could happen, and it could with the Pennsylvania Senate, is maybe if we go into June 30th of next year and they're kind of wheeling and dealing back and forth, and the Senate wants something out of the House, and the House says, well, pass minimum wage. So I could see in that scenario where a possible minimum wage increase would happen. But on its own, I don't think there's an appetite in the Senate to pass it.
We had a reporter guest on Capitol Preview recently, and he had filed a story about Republicans changing their minds about mail-in voting. And according to his story, suddenly they were embracing it. Who cares to give me a short history of mail-in voting? Go
Sure,
ahead, Kevin.
I can give you that. So it's Act 77, which passed in October of 2019, which allowed for mail-in ballots or no excuse ballots, and also eliminated the straight party line voting.
I remember.
Okay,
yep.
So that passed, and then we obviously had COVID. So the Democrats, to their credit, really embraced mail-in ballots. The Republicans did not as much. And then there was the lawsuit against Act 77, and you remember that the Commonwealth Court found it unconstitutional. Then it went to the Supreme Court, which found it to be constitutional. So the bottom line is mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania are the law of the land now. So the Republicans said, as opposed to continuing to fight it, we now need to embrace it. So
why did Democrats latch on to mail-in ballots in the first place, Brit?
That's a good question. Honestly, our voters aren't always like great turn up in person kind of voters, but they want to participate for whatever reason, can't get there, unusual hours, unreliable transportation, whatever the reason is. Mail-in voting is easy, it's safe, it's legal, it is not rife with the fraud that Republicans have been claiming it is. So, Kevin gave a great background of the legislative and legal history of this, but there's also the practical history. Republicans ran against this aggressively. They said that it was fraudulent, they said not to do it, they fought Act 77, and thus did not inspire their voters to vote by mail. And so as Democrats get better and better at making sure everyone participates now because it's so easy, Republicans have been a little bit further behind. So now they have to work against 3 years of their messaging efforts to convince their voters that mail-in voting is safe. And I've seen the PA GOP working a new marketing strategy called Bank Your Ballot. And I don't think it's going particularly well for them. If you look at the returns already, Democrats are returning at a much higher rate their mail-in ballots.
Bank your ballot? I don't get it.
Yes, do it ahead of time. Make sure it's in and counted before election
So I was
day.
going to ask you what kind of campaigns or strategies you would expect to come out about this.
So part of the strategy of the Republicans and this was kind of a give and take with Governor Wolf on Act 77, was the Republicans on terms of absentee ballots, which you had to have, you had to be out of the area or a doctor's appointment or had some other excuse that you had to give. Republicans on absentee ballots always outperformed the Democrats. So the Republicans were thinking at the time, I understand it, hey, we're so much better at absentee ballot programming than the Democrats are. We'll be better at mail-in ballots. But then COVID hit, and you had all the issues with the Supreme Court changing the rules of mail-in ballots. So then mail-in ballots were challenged. So Brittany's right. We're about 3 years behind the Democrats.
All right, we only have about a minute left in our program. Let's consider a hearing that's going to happen this week, and it's the House Health Committee. They're going to have a hearing on legalizing recreational marijuana. So try to take a minute or so and tell me how attitudes have changed within the legislature on this subject.
Well, we passed medical marijuana, I think, back in 2014. And,
a while ago, yeah.
Yeah, so, and that program has had some bumps in the road, but certainly there's all in all, I'd say it's been a success. So in terms of passing recreational marijuana, I think you got to really look what's happening in other states that have done it and to be very careful. And I think the one thing you should do is if you're going to have recreational marijuana, that it should come from those factories or plants that we built in Pennsylvania so that they get money as opposed to just, buying it from your drug dealer down the street.
Brit, 30 seconds on the prospect of legalized recreational marijuana.
Sure. I think that it's increased drastically even in the last 2 or 3 years as it's gained Republican support in both chambers, and we've had lessons learned from other states. There's a proposed enormous tax benefit to Pennsylvania, the revenue that we could generate from something like this, and we already have a fantastic system to distribute. We have the state stores for liquor. You could add another service to there, and we already have the infrastructure built out.
Our guests have been Kevin Harley, Managing Director at Quantum Communications, and Brit Crampsie, president of Brit Crampsie Communications. Thank you both. If you'd like to visit Pennsylvania's parks and forests, there's a new state office that wants to make you more aware of the outdoor options that you can enjoy. Nathan Riegner, director of the PA Office of Outdoor Recreation. Why was this office created?
Thanks for having me here, Larry. This office was created because we've come to a bit of a new realization about outdoor recreation. We've always understood outdoor recreation to be a nice Saturday outside with our friends and family, and it certainly is that. Outdoor recreation is also an industry in Pennsylvania, a $14 billion industry, and it's a pathway toward competitiveness for our economic development in the Commonwealth. And that's the lane that the Office of Outdoor Recreation was established to grow, unite, and strengthen in the Commonwealth.
Well, Nathan, let's say someone's just moved to Pennsylvania. What kinds of outdoor recreation does Pennsylvania have to offer?
All kinds. We've got summer recreation, hiking, biking, boating, fishing. We have hunting. A big surprise for me since I've taken this job is the amount of rock climbing we have in the Commonwealth. We've got world-class whitewater. We have bird watching. You name it, Larry, we got it.
Now, what kinds of improvements, Nathan, would you like to make to outdoor recreation? In other words, where do you start with this new office, and how do you put together an agenda?
Well, over the past year, we've been working hard with stakeholders, outdoor businesses, economic developers, the public health sector, conservation groups, of course, users, listening to them, asking, what are your hopes and dreams for the future? What do you need to get there? And that process has coalesced around three strategic priorities that the office has to advance. One is building capacity within our outdoor industry, helping it organize and advocate for itself like every other industry in the Commonwealth does, developing our outdoor workforce and communicating the value of the outdoors. That's our first strategic priority area. Our second strategic priority area has to do with leveraging outdoor recreation for economic competitiveness through steering policy and funding to Pennsylvania from the federal government and Pennsylvania communities from the state government in ways that are relevant on the ground, while at the same time bulking up our capacity at the local and regional level to take advantage of that funding and policy. And while we're working on the industry and while we're working on economic competitiveness, we can't forget about the humanity in outdoor recreation, the reasons why we do it. Mm-hmm. And for that, we need to grow the inclusive and equitable well-being that outdoor recreation delivers us by focusing on all Pennsylvanians today and making sure that everyone in the Commonwealth can benefit from outdoor recreation, and by keeping an eye down the road, 20, 30 years down the road, and creating the outdoor recreation system, the infrastructure, the pathways to leadership to create the system our children and our children's children will need.
Nathan, it seems to me your office could be an opportunity to put together forms of different outdoor recreation and bringing them all under one umbrella. Just what kind of coordination do you see the office doing?
Very strategic and positive coordination. One of the roles of the office is to be a hub, a connector of agencies in the government. You know, when we look at outdoor recreation in the Commonwealth, certainly Department of Conservation and Natural Resources plays a huge role. That's the department within which I work. Mm-hmm. As does the Game Commission, the Fish and Boat Commission, Department of Community and Economic Development, PennDOT, Department of Health, Labor and Industry, all have a role in our outdoor economy. And so we're working to create ties, to create collaboration and synergy among those departments. And in doing so, we're working to expand the range of outdoor recreation available, the range of activities, and particularly to connect outdoor recreation to communities.
Nathan, you said earlier that you have to listen to the stakeholders. So at this point, just what have you learned from listening? In other words, is there a certain repetition that is emerging that you're really learning a lesson from?
Absolutely. From many of our outdoor businesses, particularly our guides, our outfitters, our rental shops, We've heard that permitting, agreements, regulation can often be confusing. There are many, many of them that are required. And so we want to develop resources for our guides and outfitters to streamline that process and allow them to move smoothly. We've heard from communities as diverse as Philadelphia and Warren, Pennsylvania, that outdoor recreation, connecting their communities with trails, preserving their public land and enhancing access to it is something that they see as a pathway to the development of their economies and to helping their communities be safe and livable.
Nathan, is there a pathway you're taking to a very definite agenda with certain concrete goals on it? And if so, what's the timetable on getting something like that established?
Well, our first concrete goal is to help establish an outdoor business alliance for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, an advocacy group in Harrisburg that can speak to state government about the needs of the outdoor industry and help envision what we in the Commonwealth can do to support our outdoor businesses. We have some grant applications in to support that effort and hope that this winter we'll be able to move forward with that. Our second priority is developing our outdoor workforce, understanding who are our outdoor workers. It's easy to think about guides and outfitters, as I've mentioned, the employees at ski areas, gear manufacturers and retailers. Our outdoor workforce also includes a large number of professionals, whether they be designers and planners, trail builders. I know that there are attorneys and accountants that specialize in outdoor recreation. We've got creative professionals putting out media, social media, print media, photographers, artists, guidebook and map makers. We want to look at what these professionals need to advance their careers, to create greater value for themselves and their families, and to develop on-ramps for more Pennsylvanians to connect their passion for the outdoors with their professions.
Nathan, we only have about 30 seconds left in our interview. How will you know your office is heading in the right direction? How do you intend to measure your success? Try to tell me in about 30 seconds.
Well, we'll know our office is successful as Pennsylvania becomes a national leader in outdoor recreation, as our outdoor recreation assets help to attract new businesses, retain workers, and inspire entrepreneurs in the Commonwealth. That's how we'll know we've been successful.
Nathan Riegner, Director of the PA Office of Outdoor Recreation, thanks for your time.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
One more thing before we wrap up, a reminder about On the Issues tomorrow. We'll have two more candidates for you to meet. They're both running for PA Superior Court. First at 6 p.m., Republican Maria Batista explains her campaign. Then, on the Democrat side of the ticket, Tamika Lane tells us why she wants your vote at 6:30 p.m. That's it for the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Larry Kasper. Thanks for watching.